We're continuing our discussion on goal setting, productivity, and execution. And the last time that we met, when we talked about part one, we talked about two things that are really foundational and very important to what we're going to talk about today. We talked about the rule of life, and we talked about goal setting. And really, again, remember, thinking back a couple weeks ago, the rule of life is that foundational piece, kind of helping you understand the vision for your life and the mission for your life based on your roles and your desires and your gifts, and then taking that mission and vision and beginning to prioritize that into the rhythms of your life. Then we talked about goal setting, how we set good, healthy goals. We talked about setting smarter goals. And the reason all of that is important, the reason we need to set that rule of life in place, the reason we need to set smarter goals is because if we don't do that in the beginning, what in the world are we going to spend our life doing? What is each and every day going to look like? What is each and every week going to look like? How do you know if you're moving the ball down the field? So you set the goal to begin to do that very thing. And so that's what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about productivity, which is related to the goal setting, and I'll show you how in just a second. And then briefly talk about execution. We've set these goals. We're trying to be productive in these goals. Now, how do we execute these goals? Okay? So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is productivity. And what I want to talk to you first is what Michael Hyatt calls your ideal week. Your ideal week. And if you have your printouts from the Full Focus Planner, that's the first two pages, or not the first two pages from last week, but kind of in the middle that you're going to see that looks like kind of an Excel spreadsheet. Michael Hyatt defines the ideal week like this: the week I would live if I could control 100% of what happens. Now, there's a very special, important, significant word in that sentence. If. Because here's the reality. Your week is never fully in your control, right? Things happen. We were talking about this in our residency a few weeks ago, and Sean was going back to his days as a principal. And we were talking, one of the things we're going to talk about is time wasters and keeping your email open the whole time. And Sean was like, that was like part of my job. And so I had to keep my email open and see what was coming in and respond immediately. And so how do you deal with that? How do you handle that? And that's the challenge of the ideal week. The ideal week is not meant to be set to suggest that this is exactly how it's going to go every time, every week. And so what you're doing, though, is you're beginning to put together a framework in which, if you had complete control, 100% control, this is what your week would look like, okay? Now, there are some things that Michael Hyatt talks about that kind of govern and help you design your ideal week. The first thing that he talks about are the themes. So if you look at this Excel spreadsheet of the ideal week, you'll see at the very top day themes. And what he talks about are that there are three themes that kind of govern our lives. Okay, the first one is the front stage, the second is the back stage, and the third is the off stage. So the front stage are those things that we're doing that we got hired to do. So like when you look at your job description, these are the things that are part of your job description that you know you have to do. So Sunday morning, preaching for me, that's part of my job. That's a front stage activity for me, okay? The backstage activity is things that where you're preparing to do what you were hired to do. So I've spent this morning meeting with some of the other pastors, talking about my sermon, working on my sermon. It's backstage work because I'm preparing to do what I've been hired to do. And then lastly, this is really important, this is what we talked about in Staff Chapel, off stage. That there has to be time in your life where you're off stage and where you're literally Sabbathing and resting. Now, there are going to be days, this is what's important as you think about your ideal week, there are going to be days in which you're kind of combining on stage and off stage. There are times when you're doing both. And you've got to figure out what that might look like for yourself. But as you are thinking about your ideal week, you begin to lay out and begin, what you're thinking about is like, what is this day going to look like? And one of the things that I would encourage you, that Michael Hyatt encourages, is to try and make that as regular as possible. So if you're thinking about your ideal week and whether it's on stage or off stage, I would try almost every week to say, this day is almost always an on-stage day. This day is almost always an off-stage day, or a combo of the two. Because what we're doing there, just like what we talked about with Sabbath, we're creating rhythm. And so every week, there's a rhythm to what we're doing, okay? So you have these themes. You also have these focus areas, and I think those are to the left of the page on the ideal week. I think these are a little more flexible. The ones that Michael Hyatt talks about are self, work, and rejuvenation. So he begins to break his day down. So like his morning and his evenings are for himself, right? Whether it's quiet time with the Lord, whether it's time with your family, getting ready, whatever that might be. Middle of the day, there might be a lot of work. And then maybe at the end of the day, there's that rejuvenation. So you begin to think, are there these focus areas to your work, and certain periods of the day, this is what you're doing. Now, one of the things I think is really important with the ideal week, he puts the ideal week in the full focus planner as like you writing it out. One of the other things that I've seen him do before, and if you go to the link on setting up your ideal week with Michael Hyatt, you'll see it. And you can also Google ideal week Michael Hyatt. And what he's also done before is used an Excel spreadsheet. And then based on the kind of work that you do, front stage, backstage, off stage, or whatever, it's color coded. And so I would encourage, some of you probably need to think about your ideal week like that. You need to think about putting it on an Excel spreadsheet and beginning to lay out, I do this kind of work. And maybe you want to break down your work even more. Like meetings are a totally different color versus studying is a totally different color versus any sort of preparation that you have to do. And so you can take this and begin to think about your week, hopefully more creatively, and helping you organize your week a little bit better. There's a couple other things that I want to talk about when it comes to the ideal week. Make sure you're doing the right thing at the right time. What tasks could you be more effective at by changing the time of day that you do them? So part of this is thinking about your energy level at different times of day, okay? You all know this about me. I'm a morning person, I'm not a night person. I had the Bricks over the other night, and Brick and I almost fell asleep during the dinner because we were tired. It was in the evening. So I'm not a night person. So I don't like to do anything in the evening that I have to actually think. But I am a morning person, and so I know that my best time is first thing in the morning. So again, I think I've used this example before. When I was writing my dissertation, most of my dissertation got written between 5:30 and 7:30 a.m. Why? That was just when my mind was fresh. I could sit down and I was just blazing. And it's just because that's how I'm wired. That's how I am. And now I've gotten myself in such a rhythm. I wake up most mornings around 5 o'clock. And so I'm just ready to get up. So you need to find the right time of day to do certain things. And you might not be being productive with certain things because you're doing them at the wrong time. So for instance, one of the things that I've begun to do is anytime that I need to do research, I need to write, I need to think, I do it in the morning. Because that's when my mind is sharpest. If I have to have a meeting, I like to do it during lunch or after lunch, because talking to people for me requires a little less energy, and then I have to boost my energy a little bit more to engage with somebody. If I'm on my computer reading or writing or whatever, that's when I get tired and I don't want to work. So as you think about your ideal week and you think about these focuses and how you're working that week, you need to think about, okay, this chunk of time, I don't need to do this during this chunk of time. I need to adjust this. It should also, as best you can, there's the reality that we need to be flexible. But when you're trying to schedule meetings or someone asks you to meet with them or whatever, you should use this ideal week as best as possible to say, I can't meet then, or this is when I can meet. And so you've got to, as best you can, control your schedule, because it's the way that you're going to be most productive, and you're responsible for you. So as you think about that, think about what kind of requests you take and when you take them and when you should take them, okay? So that's one important thing about the ideal week. The other thing that's really important comes from another blog, and the title of the blog was 5 Types of Work That Fill Your Day. And I think this is really important, and it should be kind of a warning sign for many of us. It is for me, at least, to begin to think about these different types of work. Okay, so the first work is reactionary work, and we'll kind of talk about each one. The second one is planning. The third is procedural. The fourth is insecurity. The fifth is problem solving. Now there are certain, number one, here's the reality. Reality is all 5 of these types of work need to fill your day. That there's a good chance that probably in some form or capacity, you're going to be doing all of these things. But what you've got to do is begin to think about what's most important in your day. What needs to take up the biggest amount of time in your day. So reactionary work is what we were talking about. Your email's open, and anytime you get an email, immediately you react, right? Or someone walks into your office and says, hey, we need this, or I need that. Now, sometimes those things, right, emergencies come up, those kinds of things happen. You can't diminish reactionary work. Like, you can't erase it from your life. But I think what this blog is trying to do and what the ideal week is trying to do is say, listen, as best you can, you need to minimize reactionary work. So you got to figure out what that means for you. Does it mean that you don't keep your email open all day? Does it mean, one of the things Michael Hyatt talks about is phone calls. So like one of the things that he talks about in a blog or something is him trying to make sure he gets home on time. If his phone rings 30 minutes before the end of his day, he doesn't answer it. And the reason he doesn't answer it, because he knows it could bleed over into the time that he needs to leave to get home. So goes to voicemail, text message, whatever. He makes a point to call the next day. So you begin to set those things into your life so you're not reacting to everything that's happening. So you want to try and minimize, as best you can, reactionary work. We're going to talk about morning startup or work startup rituals and work shutdown rituals. That's a good place to put reactionary work. Number 2, this is one of those that I think we really need to work on and prioritize more, is planning. So are you building times into your week where you can spend intentional, focused time planning what you're going to do? Whether that's the week, whether that's 2 weeks from now, whether that's a month, whether that's the next quarter, whatever that looks like, are you building that time in? There's procedural work. And so these are things that have to happen. But what this blog encourages is, instead of you doing it, are there ways that this can be automated? And so this is we just talked about the planning, right? Planning work is probably going to have to happen for you to begin to automate procedural work. So you need to think about in your own ministry areas, what are things that you can begin to automate? Right? One of the things that we've done recently as a staff that Sean has done for us is, I don't have to send a text message every time we're about ready to do something as a reminder. You've gotten an automated response through your Google Calendar or iCal to say, hey, in 10 minutes we're having a meeting. Now you're still late, but I'm kidding. Not really, but kind of. So there's procedural. You got to automate things. Number 4, insecurity. Insecurity work is the kind of work that you need to compartmentalize into smaller blocks. What is insecurity work? Stuff that you want to constantly check. So if you were like in sales, you would be constantly checking to see what your sales are for the day. You know, that when I worked at Sears, that was one of the things. Like every hour they were updating sales figures to make sure we were, you know, above our goal, at our goal, or below our goal. What are insecurities that you guys have in your ministry areas that you want to constantly check? And instead of constantly checking them, begin to build them in and compartmentalize them so you're only doing it once or twice a day instead of frequently. So insecurity work. And the last one's problem solving. Problem solving is, you know, when you've got something that you're thinking through that you want to solve. And I want to encourage you, this goes back to, are you doing it at the right time of day? Do problem solving work when you are at your best, when you are mentally sharp, and not when you're about to pass out because you're exhausted or when you can't think. So as best you can, you want to continue to you want to put that problem solving work in that time period where you're on point, where your mind is sharp and where you can think, where you can be creative, where you can be critical, and you can problem solve. So that's some things for you to think about in regards to your ideal week. Hopefully that helps a little bit in regards to productivity. The other thing that I want to talk to you about is creating routines. Now, for some of you, this is easy. For some of you, this is very difficult. I am like I'm like a playbook. Like it's just the same thing. If I could live the same life every day, that's probably what I would do. And, you know, I just like the rhythm. I don't like spontaneity. I don't like change. I want it to be the same way, the same time. And there is a lot of benefit to that, but at the same time, there's a lot of danger in that. But for those of you who struggle with that and want to be more spontaneous and are kind of all over the place and less scheduled and routined, the thing that you have to do is begin to build into your life routines that are healthy and helpful for you, okay? So creating routines. The way Michael Hyatt describes it is, he calls these routines rituals, okay? What's a ritual? A prescribed procedure for achieving specific results. Simple thing. Prescribed procedure for achieving specific results. And he kind of lays out some of the benefits of rituals. I've given you guys 5 of them to think about. Number 1, rituals help put you in a mental and physical groove for high performance. So one of the things that Michael Hyatt talks about in his videos and his podcasts and kind of stuff is like, there's a reason athletes have a pregame ritual, right? There's a reason athletes do the same thing every time. Because it's part of it is mentally preparing them for what's about to come. And so some of it's physical, like if they probably stretch before a game or whatever, they need that physical stretching to prepare them physically. But a lot of it is just mental preparation. And so part of that is to help them prepare for what's going to come and put them at a place where they can have high performance. Number 2, the benefit of a ritual allows you to perform at a predictably high level. The routine leaves less to chance, so you can focus on performing at your best. So this is a good example of this. For me, morning routines are really important because if I don't have a morning routine, then there's a good chance I might get out the door late. My son would be late to school. I would be late to work. And then when I'm late to things, it throws my whole day off because I feel like I'm playing catch up the entire time. So you begin to put that routine and that ritual in place, which allows you then to leave less to chance. And you've planned what is seemingly small, minor stuff, right? But is important. So one of the things I've recently realized is for me to get here on a Sunday morning at the optimal time, I have to start to get ready at 6:15 in the morning. I get ready. I know some of you get here earlier than that. Calm down. I don't need to get here that early. But At 6:15, I recognize that gives me enough time to get myself ready. Usually I bring Gabe with me to get Gabe ready to be able to be here no later than 7:30. If I try and get ready any later than 6:15, I feel rushed. And then I might be a few minutes late, and then that kind of messes with me mentally if I have to preach or I have to do something important on a Sunday morning. Number 3, benefit of a ritual, it stops you from overthinking. So you're not constantly engineering and re-engineering your entire performance. So if you have this ritual in place, you don't have to ask what's next. You already know. This is what we're doing next. This is what I do next, right? So what do I do when I wake up first thing? After I use the restroom, I make coffee. That's the first thing I do. That's an important ritual that I have. So you want to set those in place. Number 4, it allows you to upgrade your performance because you've broken apart the individual steps. So you can begin to think about tweaking them individually. I think what we tend to do is we think about if we're talking about the morning or the evening or even sometimes parts of our day, we think about the whole thing. We think about our entire morning, whatever that looks like, 5:30 to 8. And you're thinking about a 2.5 hour period. If you begin to break down your ritual into smaller pieces, then you begin to see each of those things. And you begin to say, I have this amount of time allotted to this. So if you've built in a morning ritual, but you're having a really hard time keeping up consistently reading your scriptures and praying in the morning, break those into smaller pieces. There's your Bible reading. You begin to then look, why is the Bible reading suffering? Is something else encroaching in it? Am I running out of time? Do I need to cut something? What does that look like? So that's number 4. Number 5, it gives you a sense of purpose and confidence. By working your ritual, you set your mind and body at ease and take control of what you can control. So you set a ritual in place, and if you keep doing the ritual, guess what? You feel successful because you're carrying out the very thing that you planned. And if you don't feel successful, then you can adjust and make those adjustments. So I think rituals are really important. The thing that I would encourage you in is if some of you feel kind of overwhelmed with your day and you're not getting everything done or whatever, you might not be setting yourself up for success first thing, right? You might not be doing some of the very basic thing. You might have not even thought about how you set your day up and begin. If you've not done that, that might be what is causing you to get behind, feel like you're behind, feel rushed, those kinds of things. We've already talked about these a little bit, but here's some of the types of rituals that Michael Hyatt talks about. The morning ritual, so anything that sets you up for a productive day. What do you need in the morning to set you up for a productive day? And you just got to begin to think about that and what that would look like for your life. The next one is the workday startup ritual, anything that you need to do that sets you up for a productive workday. So you begin to think about that. One of the things that we're going to talk about is the weekly 3 and the daily big 3. Good time to think about your goals. First thing when you get in, to look at your kind of to-do list. What are the things that you need to accomplish today? If you don't want to be overwhelmed with email, first thing when you get in, look at your email, answer the emails that you can, and then move on to the work that you need to do. So that's the workday startup ritual. The workday shutdown ritual, what are things that you need to do to wrap up your day and then help you kick off your next day? So whatever that might be, like if there's something you need to prepare and it's a little bit of setup for an early meeting the next day, try and build that into the end of your day previously so you can come in and be prepared for your meeting, not be overwhelmed. Maybe it's checking your email one last time, returning messages, whatever that might look like. What's that last thing that you need to do? The evening ritual, anything that sets you up to get a restful night. So whatever that looks like. Part of that is saying, I'm going to bed at this time and not staying up to the butt crack of dawn when you know you got to get up early. Setting those schedules, just determining what you need to include. Like if you have kids that go to school, part of that might be homework. Part of that might be spending time with them before they go to bed. Part of that might be spending time with your wife or your significant other before they go to bed. So the evening ritual. The last one is the Sabbath. And we spent a lot of time talking about that last time at the staff chapel. We're going to talk more about that. I do want to encourage you. I think I printed it for you, the weekend optimizer sheets. I think that this sheet is a very simple, basic tool to help you begin to think about your Sabbath. And what I don't want to do is encourage you to make your Sabbath robotic. But at the same time, it's like anything else we've been talking about. If you're not going to plan for it, it's not going to happen. And so, like literally Sunday night, because Rachel and I hadn't had a lot of time, I have a really hard time sitting down and actually talking to my wife in the later evening after the kids go to bed, or trying to think critically about, okay, we want to do these things in our life. So for me, Sunday afternoon was an optimal time. I got home after our leadership meeting. We were outside because it was 70 degrees out, and we sat there while the kids dug in the dirt and made a mess, and talked about our Sabbath and what we wanted to include. And so Rachel and I began to talk about, these are the things that we want to include, we don't want to include, some of the things that we're willing to flex on, other things that we say, no, these are absolutes. So as you begin to plan your Sabbath, the Sabbath is a ritual, right? Because it's a rhythm that's going to come around every week. So you want to build that in as a routine and rhythm. So when Friday night, if Saturday's your Sabbath, if Friday night rolls around, you don't feel like you have to do a ton of prep and be overwhelmed to say, I have no idea what our Sabbath is going to look like. If you make it a ritual, then it no longer becomes this overwhelming thing that you have to constantly plan for. That's also to say, I think this is really important, that's also to say that rituals are not a bad thing. I think in our day and age, rituals are like, they're old and they're not freeing, and we feel like you got to throw off all these rituals. But I think there are some things in our life that we need that can be like a ritual. And so some of those things are really important. Let's talk about the next thing, organizing tasks. I want you to look at a couple documents. One of the documents was the weekly Big Three. So look at the weekly review. Or did I print off the weekly Big Three? Okay. Well, it's in two places for you, okay? So one is at the beginning of the Full Focus Planner, there's a weekly Big Three. And then they build it in. We're going to talk about the weekly review in just a little bit. They build it in to the end of the weekly review, okay? So you have your weekly Big Three. I'm going to walk through weekly Big Three and daily Big Three together because they work together. The weekly Big Three are important action items that move you in the direction of your goals, okay? So the last time we met, we talked about goal setting. We talked about setting 7 to 10 goals for the year. Your weekly Big Three are beginning every week. You're beginning to think about how can you knock chunks off of that big goal. Now, what I'm not saying is this week you're going to fulfill that big goal. But what you are going to have to do is begin to think about smaller pieces, taking bite-sized chunks out of it, right? Where you can begin to break that goal down and make that goal and meet that goal. And so the weekly Big Three is designed to help you do just that. For you to begin to think about, okay, what do I need to do this week to begin to break this, to beat this goal, to meet this goal, okay? That's also the other thing that's really important that Michael Hyatt talks about in that you really probably can't accomplish more than 3 to 4 goals per quarter. So you're going to have 7 to 10, but if you're trying to accomplish 7 to 10 goals in one quarter, then, your weekly Big Three might be a different goal almost every week because you're trying to accomplish so much. So but you've got to think about those big goals, those yearly goals, kind of quarterly, and then you begin to break them down into these weekly Big Three. Then you go to the daily Big Three, okay? So look at the other sheet that has the daily big three, other tasks, the day of the week at the top. So your daily big three are the most important tasks in a day with the greatest impact. Okay, so as you begin to, we talked about that workday shutdown ritual. You come to the end of the day, then you begin to think about the next day. What's the thing or things that are going to have the greatest impact on what you're doing? Now, here's what I would say. There's two things here. One is the daily big three will sometimes be connected to the weekly big three and the yearly goals, right? I mean, there might be days where you're doing stuff, like most of what you're doing is trying to reach the goals that you're setting. And that's important. But then there are days where your daily big three are not attached or loosely attached to your weekly big three and your yearly goals. So like today is a great example of this, okay? So I spent my morning in sermon preparation. Now we're in staff lunch. We're getting ready to go into a pastor's meeting, and then we're working out as a staff. None of those things are directly involved with the goals that I've set. Now, they're closely attached, okay? So think about it like this. The sermon preparation I did was for Replicate, right? And we spent intentional time thinking about application that's connected into building and growing disciples. One of the things we want to do is launch life groups and grow in our discipleship this year. So my preaching is important to that, but it's not, I wouldn't call it moving the ball 10 yards down the field, maybe 2 or 3 yards down the field. Or think about, we want to create a leadership pipeline this year, right? Leadership development pipeline. Not necessarily doing anything exactly for that, but we are doing leadership development right now. So you're going to have some days that your daily big three are intimately connected to your big goals. And then you're going to have other days where there's other things that you're doing that you have to do week in and week out that might not be as closely associated with your goals. But they're still important tasks for that day, right? One of my important tasks on Sunday, like this past Sunday, I had 3 important tasks. Preach 2 times, speak at the leadership meeting, and read. Read what? Just whatever I wanted to read. But it was Sunday, the back end of my day, I wanted to read, and that was an important task for me. So weekly big three, daily big three, you'll look at this daily sheet. At the bottom are these other tasks. The other reality is that your day is going to be filled with things that are not priority, but have to get done. And so a great example of that is like tomorrow or today, I needed to remind myself, I needed to print the V group study for tonight to lead our V group. So I put that in there so I wouldn't forget. On Thursday, I need to edit the next V group study to get it to Chris so it can get posted. It's not part of my big three. It's not going to like change the world or anything, but it's very important to some of the other things that I do. So you begin to put in your day, what are those other tasks that you have? Now, what he does, this is something that honestly I've not done great at yet, but I still think is very valuable. When you think about these other tasks, you need to begin to think about, number one, completing them, finishing them, but also delegating, deferring, waiting for, and deleting. Now, Michael Hyatt gets really creative. You see at the very bottom of your page, like different marks that you can make on the page to help you visualize that. Whether you use that or not, you need to think about that with these tasks that you complete. So the check mark is a good thing because it sees that you've completed it. If you're like me, the check mark makes you feel good. It's something that you want to see happen in your week and in your day. But then there also might be tasks that you put on your list that you delegate. And so you need to mark that. You need to look through that task. What can I delegate? There might be tasks that you have to defer. So there have been days in the past couple of weeks where I've had stuff on my to-do list, and because of unforeseen circumstances, I had to defer that. I had to move that task to another day. So you can put that there. There's also times when you can put waiting for. What that means is you've taken a next step, you've made action on that to do, but part of completing that is waiting on somebody else to do something as well. So maybe it's send this email. You send the email, but to finish the task, you got to wait for the response. So you put that in. And then there are things to delete. And this might be something that you had on your to-do list that you realize was a waste of time and you should have never put on there to begin with. Or it's something that somebody else did. And you were planning on doing it, but somebody else took care of it, and therefore you can delete it. So you begin to think about your week like that. You have these regular tasks, but you have these daily big three. You also have the weekly big three. And I think, honestly, some of the most important thing in relation to the goal setting and productivity and execution are the yearly goals, the weekly big three, and the daily big three. When you can begin to prioritize your work according to that, you're going to begin to see some of these big goals that you have, again, get down into bite-sized chunks that you're able to accomplish. And I think that's so important because there's two things that happen. Number one, we get paralyzed. Like if we have a really big goal, we get paralyzed in thinking we're never going to be able to complete it, right? When I was writing my dissertation with the bibliography, it was a little over 300 pages. When I sat down to write it, there was 0 pages written. You think about writing something from 0 to 300, you have a holy cow and you think, I'm never going to be able to finish this. You think about a chapter, 20, 30, 40 pages, it's a little more doable. Then you begin to piece those together. And even if a chapter is overwhelming, think about a section of the chapter, 5 to 10 pages, becomes more doable. So this daily big three and the weekly big three help make our goals more bite-sized. They also challenge us to make action steps. So I think one of our challenges as leaders is we have these goals, and it's a goal that we want to accomplish, but what happens is we never accomplish the goal because we actually don't think about the next steps we need to take to see the goal come to fruition. And so when you begin to think about your weekly big three and your daily big three, you're beginning to take and think about action steps that are going to help you break down your week. Let's talk about some time killers. There's really 3. Number 1, multitasking. It's an impossible feat that causes us to switch between tasks and diminishes our productivity. Now, Sean was rocking his baby and working yesterday. That's a little different. Sean has that ability that some of us just don't have. But if you're trying to write an email and at the same time prepare for a sermon, one of those is going to get less attention. Or you're going to accomplish both, it's going to take you longer because you don't have concentrated effort on one thing. So at the end of the day, my encouragement to you guys is to not try and multitask, to try and be productive with your time, to knock out things as fast as you can or in the amount of time that you need, and then move on to the next task. Number 2, we've already talked about this, but email. Avoid keeping email open all day. This is a big one for me. Instead, build in defined times during the day to check and respond to emails. So again, think about that workday startup ritual, the workday shutdown ritual. The last one is social media. Don't waste time on social media. This is why Sean's not on Facebook, right? Social media is not a bad thing, though. And there's a reality that in all of our ministry areas, we use social media for ministry, right? And if people are in other careers, they're probably using social media for that very same thing. And so I think the point is not to erase social media from your workday, but to begin to compartmentalize it to other parts of your day. So if you're going to use social media, think about using it during that workday startup or that workday shutdown, maybe during lunch or something. But if you've got it constantly open, then what you're doing is you're interrupting your workflow. You're interrupting your mental thought or whatever you're doing, or you're not fully engaged. If you're in a meeting and you're on social media, you're not going to be fully engaged in that conversation. And so those 3 time killers, I think, are things that we need to do our best to stay away from or kind of reorient in our workday: multitasking, email, and social media. So we've talked about productivity. Let me talk briefly about execution. And I really want us to think about this in regards to project plans. This is something that I learned at Long Hollow when I was up there for a cohort. That was kind of one of those just kind of random things that we were talking about something and it came up. And so one of their staff guys and pastors kind of laid out how they begin to execute projects. And I think as you think about your goals and what you need to accomplish, putting these project plans together will help you then execute the goal, okay? So the first thing that they talk about is the goal. What is the goal? What is it that you're wanting to accomplish? Okay? I think that starts, we've already talked about that. That's what the goal setting was for. What's that smarter goal? Right? So you begin to lay out what is the goal. Number 2, the value. And for us, this is for us in particular, but it would be for any other company. What vintage value does this project align with? So we have these values of truth, love, and community, right? And they might crisscross, but as you think about that project that you're working on, that you're trying to execute, you want it to align with your values. And so where does it align there? And that's going to help you, I think, keep a lot of the goals where they need to be and straightforward. 3, this is important for us as we've kind of rolled out the vintage pathway, but you want to think about, where does this project fit within the pathway? Is this helping people gather, connect, partner, lead, or send? And again, that's going to help you, I think, articulate what the goal is, execute the goal, think about whether or not you're kind of going off track or off to the side a little bit, and keeping it back in the center. One of the most important things that we've kind of already talked a little bit about is action steps. So as you have this goal and you're thinking about how it fits within the pathway and your values, what are next steps that you're going to take? Like whatever the project is, and you begin to list those out. And there might be, these next steps might be kind of the big picture next steps. And then as you break down each next step, you're beginning to almost put subpoint next steps that you have to think about. But if you don't think about taking those next steps, you're probably not going to take a next step, right? So you want to list out those next steps. The next one is team members. Who needs to be on this project with you, okay? So this is important for our staff so we can be productive with one another. Because if there's a big project coming and you're leading it, but you know that you're going to have other team members on it, you need to let them know. Because they need to begin to structure whatever their work is partly around this project. But this is, I think, even more important for us, is many of our leaders are lay leaders. And so if you're beginning to think about team members that are on this project, that you're going to have less flexibility with them because they work another full-time job. So you need to think about them and then be proactive in some of those action steps. Say, okay, how can I engage these people now for a project that's coming in a month or 2 months or whatever that time frame looks like, so that they have enough time to begin planning to be able to be a part of the project. This is an easy one, but I think it's important. Completion date. When's the goal to have this rolled out? When do you want this project to be finished? That's very important. That's part of, remember, the smarter goals, that the goal needs to be time bound. So what's the completion date? And then something that is vitally important that I don't think we do enough is measures. And the importance of having measures here is so you don't cheat yourself. Because this is what you could do, okay? You could develop the goal and the project and put it all together and not worry about the measures, how you're going to measure whether or not you're successful or not. Roll out the project, whether it's an event or a program or whatever it is, and then come back to it and say, well, this is how we were successful. Well, I mean, what you've done is you didn't set the bar and then tried to reach the bar. You made it a certain way and said, where we made it is the bar. So you very well might have cheated yourself and not challenged yourself. If you begin here in the planning phase to say, it's a success when we do this, this, and this, the project happens, you go back, and then you're able to accurately assess whether or not you did this, this, or this. And then you go back again and you begin to brainstorm, okay, where did we go right? Where did we go wrong? Why did we meet this measure but not that measure? And so set goals within the goals. That's what these are. The measures or goals that you want to meet. And do that before you begin to roll out the project. So that's really important to execution. I think part of our challenge as leaders is we have goals and then we don't worry about any of these things and we just go with it. And we just make it up as we go. If we want to be productive and we want to execute things well, we start early, we begin these project plans, and then we execute the steps, the action steps that we've laid out. And then we assess as we go. Last thing that I want to talk to you about is weekly review. So you can look at those last 2 pages, if you will. And this is something that I think is incredibly important that Michael Hyatt has included in the Full Focus Planner that I want to strongly encourage. Whether or not you go with the Full Focus Planner or not, I would strongly encourage you to build in time at the end of your week or the beginning of your next week to begin thinking about what happened last week, okay? So the first thing that you talk about is you identify your top accomplishments. What are your biggest wins? So go back on your week and think about what were things that I accomplished. Some of them might be related to the goals that you've set, but some of them might not be. Or some of them might be, a win might be that bite-sized daily goal that you had that you accomplished. But you begin to list out your wins. Why? Because we tend to be much harder on ourselves than we actually probably should be. So you can look back at a week and be like, I accomplished absolutely nothing. Possibly you're right. That's a bad week. But chances are you've just missed a bunch of stuff. And there's a lot of wins in your week that you just completely missed. And so this builds in an intentional time where you begin to think about that. So my biggest wins, identify your top accomplishments. Review your lists. That's that kind of middle section. This is something that I've not done really great yet, but what are tasks maybe that week you deferred to another week? You need to review the goals that you've set, the delegated tasks, major projects, your upcoming calendar, those sorts of things to kind of prepare you for the next week. The after-action review is you want to begin to think about how far did you get with your weekly big 3. And that's really important because you're thinking about bite-sized chunks of your goals, right? If you're trying to accomplish a goal and you said your weekly big 3 was bringing you to accomplish that goal, if you don't go back and look, then you're never going to know. And if you didn't accomplish part of your weekly big 3, then you recognize there's a good chance you might actually be behind on reaching that goal. So you're able to go back and think about that. How far did you get on those goals? Next, you're going to list lessons. What are things throughout your week? And this is almost like journaling in a sense, but what are lessons throughout the week that you learned that you need to take and apply in your life? And so it could be something interpersonal. It could be something that you learned about somebody and you work with that person or they're a volunteer with you and you recognize you've learned something about them. You know, one of the things that I put in my planner last week was one of the things that I learned is for Rachel and I to plan certain things or to think about like how we want our discipleship of our family to look like or our Sabbath, we've got to set aside time to actually talk about it. And I didn't learn, I learned that a while back, but it was a reminder lesson. And I didn't do it till Sunday afternoon. And so that was a lesson for me to learn. What are those lessons that you need to learn? Next, what adjustments do you need to make for your next week? So you take all the stuff that you've kind of done reverse thinking, where you've thought about your previous week, and now you're beginning to think about what are the things that, the kind of adjustments that I need to make. And it could be anything from I need to be home sooner, I need to do a better job of my morning ritual, to I'm trying to do too much with my goals. Whatever it is. What kind of adjustment then are you going to make for the next week? And then the last thing is what's next week's weekly big three. So you go back to your main goals, right? I would encourage you to review those big 7 to 10 yearly goals almost every day, or at least every week. Definitely review your weekly big three every day. Maybe it's part of your startup workday ritual. And then you go back and you say, okay, what did I do there? What needs to happen next? And so you list out those weekly big three to begin doing things for this next week. One of the things that you're going to have to think about is when you do your weekly review. So for some people, they like to do it Friday, right after the workday, or at the end of their workday, and they're thinking about it. What I have found a good rhythm for me is Sunday afternoon, because I know my week is over and I'm beginning to think about my next week. And so my mind is fresh from what I have done to what I need to do and what I want to do. And so you have to decide for yourself what you think, where you think that's going to work best. I wouldn't do it on the day that you plan on resting, because you don't want to think about work on that day. Try your best to get away from that mentality. And maybe Friday or Thursday is too early for you and you need Sunday. And a lot of times, things that I'm thinking about doing or things that I don't even know I need to do come to my mind on Sunday because I'm in that mentality. And so I begin thinking about that. So that gives you a whole lot of stuff to think about as you think about goal setting, productivity, and execution. I think the most important thing for us to think about is it's partially coming from my sermon on Sunday, but just a little different angle, the why. Like why do we want to set goals? Why do we want to be productive? Why do we want to execute? And it's not to be productive, right? It's because God has called us to set these certain goals to move the ball down the field to accomplish the mission that he's called us to. And the best way that we can do that is set goals, be productive, and execute on those goals.